Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. We are on the Kitab Imaarah, but the topic is on jihad and its virtues, and the virtues of the shaheed. This next chapter about the one who is killed in the way of Allah. From Abu Qatada, a man said to the Prophet, "Inform me, if I am killed in his way, will all my sins be forgiven?" And the Prophet said, "Yes, as long as you are patient, hoping for reward, facing the enemy and not running away." Then the Prophet asked him to repeat the question again, and so he did so, and the Prophet said, "Yes, your sins will be forgiven, as long as you are patient and seeking a reward and facing the enemy, not running away, except for the debt that you owe to others, because Jibreel has just informed me." Also from Amr ibn al-As, the Prophet said, يُغْفَرُ لِلشَّهِيدِ كُلَّ ذَنْبٍ إِلَّا الدَّيْنِ. Every sin of the shaheed is forgiven except the debt. Okay, so we learn that the debt of the shaheed is not forgiven. Why is this? Because it is a right of other people against you, as opposed to the rights of Allah against you. But does that mean he will be punished if he does not pay off his debts? The answer is no. All the hadith means is that you must pay off your debt, so the mujahid cannot say, "Well, I know, if I fight in the way of Allah Jalla wa Ala and I'm killed, then I will not need to pay off the debt anymore." The answer is no, you still need to pay off your debt from the money that you leave behind. If your intention is sound to pay off the debt, then you will not be punished. The Prophet in Al-Bukhari said, "Man akhadha amwal al-nas yuridu ada'aha adda Allahu an." Whoever takes the wealth of the people, that is, borrows it, and he intends to give it back to them, so pay back the debt, then Allah will pay it off on his behalf. وَمَنْ أَخَذَ يُرِيدُ إِتْلَافَهَا أَتْلَفَهُ اللَّهُ. But whoever takes the wealth of the people and he intends thereby to destroy their wealth, that is, not to give it back to them, then Allah will destroy him. So it depends on your intention in paying back the debt as to whether you are punished or not. So if you want to repay the debt back, then either Allah Jalla wa Ala will help you repay it back in this world. If you were unable to repay it back in this world, then Allah Jalla wa Ala will settle the score with your creditor on Yawm al-Qiyamah. But as long as your intention was sound, then you are not punishment worthy. We can actually take from this hadith that you're allowed to make an exception even if you did not originally intend it, because the Prophet did not intend this exception originally. It's only when Jibreel came and informed him of this that the Prophet made the exception. It's the similar case with the sanctity of Mecca, that you're not allowed to cut off its grass and its plants. And Al-Abbas said, "Illa al-idkhir," except the idkhir plant, because the people need it for their graves and their homes. And then the Prophet made the exception, "Illa al-idkhir." But the Prophet did not intend this exception beforehand. Likewise with Sulaiman alayhi salam, when he wanted to have conjugal relations with all of his wives, and each one will give birth to a son who will fight in the way of Allah, he was told to say inshaAllah. But he did not intend to say inshaAllah beforehand, and the Prophet said, had he said inshaAllah, he would have met his goals or his aim. So if a man has 4 wives, let's say, and he says, "I divorce all my wives," but at the end it dawns on him that he ought to make an exception, and he says, "Illa fulana," except such and such a wife. So he did not intend to make the exception firsthand, but he makes it afterwards, so this exception is correct. If a man says, "All my 4 wives are divorced," and he does not make an exception verbally, but he makes an exception in his heart, then this exception is invalid, because it must be said verbally in the same gathering or in the same speech. The exception must not be made one day later, let's say. No, it needs to be made in the same speech or in the same conversation. However, if a man says, "My wives are divorced," and he has 4 wives, then it is permissible for him to make an exception in his heart and not speak of it, because this would be a case where you say that which is general and something specific is intended. And this is permissible. They say, "Al-am urida bihi al-khas," generality, but something specific is intended. As in Allah Jalla wa Ala saying, تُدَمِّرُ كُلَّ شَيْءٍ بِأَمْرِ رَبِّهَا. The wind of Ad, it destroyed everything with the command of its Rabb. But of course everything would include the skies. It did not destroy the skies, but rather it is general am urida bihi al-khas, a general statement from which a specific entity is intended. When the Prophet said every sin of the shaheed is forgiven except the debt, does this mean that the debt is a sin? The answer is no. The word illa is an istithna munqati', a cut-off exception. So it would actually translate to but. So every sin of the shaheed is forgiven, but the debt is not forgiven. Similarly, how the malaika prostrated to Adam, فَسَجَدُوا إِلَّا إِبْلِيسَ. They prostrated except Iblis. That is to say, they prostrated, but Iblis did not prostrate. So it does not mean that Iblis was from the Malaika. This is an istithna munqati', a cut-off exception, as opposed to istithna muttasil, a joined-on exception, which would translate to except. The next chapter about the souls of the shuhada in Jannah. Abdullah ibn Mas'ud was asked about the ayah, وَلَا تَحْسَبَنَّ الَّذِينَ قُتِلُوا فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ أَمْوَاتًا بَلْ أَحْيَاءٌ عِنْدَ رَبِّهِمْ يُرْزَقُونَ. Do not consider those slain in the way of Allah as dead. Rather, they are alive, with their Rabb receiving provision. The Prophet said that the souls of the shuhada live in the bodies of green birds, who have their nests in chandeliers, hung from the throne of Allah. They eat the fruits of Jannah wherever they like, and nestle in these chandeliers. Their Rabb looks at them and asks them, "Do you want anything?" They reply, "What could we possibly want, whilst we are free to roam Jannah wherever we want?" Allah repeats the question. When the shuhada see that they will be continued to be questioned, they say, "O our Rabb, we wish for you to return our souls to our bodies, so that we may be slain once again." So when Allah sees that they do not have any need, He leaves them. This hadith informs us of the unseen, souls in the bodies of green birds, chandelier hanging from the arsh of the Rahman. We have seen none of this, and all of this is from the unseen, about which we must have Iman. If the chandeliers are hanging from the arsh of the Rahman, then it shows us that they must be in the highest reaches of Jannah, because you cannot get higher than the arsh. And these chandeliers will be like the nests of the birds, only they are made of light. Their Rabb asks them, هَلْ تَشْتَهُونَ شَيْئًا? Do you desire anything? Allah Jalla wa Ala says in Surah Az-Zukhruf, وَفِيهَا مَا تَشْتَهِيهِ الْأَنفُسُ وَتَلَذُّ الْأَعْيُنُ. And in Jannah there is what the soul desires and what the eyes take delight in. They eventually say that they want to return back to the world to die again. And this hadith then would be similar to the one we came across, that no one who enters Jannah would want to return back to this life and have anything on earth except for the shaheed, who would wish that he could return and be killed 10 times because of the honor which he sees. The next chapter about the virtue of jihad. From Abu Sa'id al-Khudri, he says that a man asked the Prophet, أَيُّ النَّاسِ أَفْضَلُ? Which man is the most virtuous? The Prophet said, رَجُلٌ يُجَاهِدُ فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ بِمَالِهِ وَنَفْسِهِ. A man who strives in the cause of Allah with his wealth and his self. قَالَ ثُمَّ مَنْ? He said, after him, who is next highest in virtue? He said, مُؤْمِنٌ فِي شِعْبٍ مِنَ الشِّعَابِ يَعْبُدُ اللَّهَ رَبَّهُ وَيَدَعُ النَّاسَ مِنْ شَرِّهِ. He said, a man living in a mountain gorge, worshipping Allah his Rabb and saving people from his own evil. So we learn from the hadith that the best of men are the ones who strive in the way of Allah with their wealth, that is to support the cause of Allah Jalla wa Ala, to support the mujahideen, and also their self, so they fight physically. And after that, it is the mu'min in one of the mountain gorges, worshipping Allah and leaving the people off from his own evil. But this second part of the hadith must be understood in the context of fitna. So he keeps away from the people and keeps away from fitna when the people are fighting each other. He saves others from his harms. But when there is not any fitna, then the Prophet authentically said, الْمُؤْمِنُ الَّذِي يُخَالِطُ النَّاسَ وَيَصْبِرُ عَلَى أَذَاهُمْ خَيْرٌ مِنَ الَّذِي لَا يُخَالِطُ النَّاسَ وَلَا يَصْبِرُ عَلَى أَذَاهُمْ. The mu'min who mixes with the people and is patient over their harms is better than the one who does not mix with the people and is not patient over their harms. So if you are able to benefit people in goodness by perhaps teaching them or setting the example, or enjoining the good and forbidding the evil, then you should do so, and you have to mix in with the people in order to do so, obviously. But this would mean that you probably would have to face some opposition and face their harms and bad character from other people. It is better then for you to keep patient over any of these harms which come your way. But we can learn that during times of fitna, it is best to keep away from people, in accordance with this hadith. The next chapter, about where one man kills another and they both enter Jannah. From Abu Hurairah, the Prophet said, يَضْحَكُ اللَّهُ إِلَى رَجُلَيْنِ يَقْتُلُ أَحَدُهُمَا الْآخَرَ كِلَاهُمَا يَدْخُلُ الْجَنَّةِ. Allah laughs at two men, one kills the other and they both enter Jannah. فَقَالُوا كَيْفَ يَا رَسُولُ اللَّهِ. They asked, how is this, O Messenger of Allah? قَالَ يُقَاتِلُ هَذَا فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ فَيُسْتَشْهَدْ. one of them fights in the way of Allah and is killed as a shaheed. ثم يتوب الله على القاتل فيسلم فيقاتل في سبيل الله عز وجل فيستشهد. Then Allah pardons the killer and he embraces Islam and he fights in the way of Allah and is killed himself as a shaheed. We take from the hadith that Allah laughs, a real laugh. It is nothing metaphorical. And in particular, it does not mean the mercy of Allah or that Allah is going to reward both of them, as the people of Ta'atil say. However, the laugh of Allah is not like our laugh. As He says, وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ كُفُوًا أَحَدٍ. There is no one or nothing similar to Him. Just remember the words of Imam Malik when he was asked, how does Allah rise over His throne? He simply said, Al-istiwa' غَيْرُ مَجْهُولٍ. Rising over the throne is not unknown. وَالْكَيْفُ غَيْرُ مَعْقُولٍ. But the how of it is not understood by any of us. وَالْإِيمَانُ بِهِ وَاجِبٌ وَالسُّؤَالُ عَنْهُ بِدْعَةٌ. But having iman in it is wajib, and asking questions about it is a bid'ah. Because the companions did not ask questions about it, despite having every need to do so. And that is the hallmarks of bid'ah. When the Prophet and the companions did not do it, despite there being a reason to do so and nothing preventing them, then for us to do it, that includes asking questions, is a bid'ah. The next chapter, the one who kills a kafir, then embraces Islam. From Abu Hurairah, the Prophet said, لا يجتمع كافر وقاتله في النار أبدا. A kafir and the one who has killed him will never be together in the fire. This hadith refers to the mujahid fighting in the way of Allah who kills the kafir. And in this hadith there is an encouragement to fight and kill the kuffar, but the reward of the hadith, that you will not be in the fire with the kafir at the same time, is upon the condition that you fight in the way of Allah with the correct intention and that you die upon Islam, keeping steadfast. However, we know from the previous hadith that if it is the other way around, that a kafir kills a Muslim fighting in the way of Allah, then they both can be in Jannah, because the kafir can now embrace Islam and fight in the way of Allah and become shaheed. Let us take a look at the next chapter about the excellence of charity in the way of Allah. From Abu Mas'ud al-Ansari. He says, an Ansari brought a bridled camel to the Prophet, and the Prophet replied, لَكَ بِهَا يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ 700 نَاقَةٍ كُلُّهَا مَخْطُومَةٍ. For this you will have on Yawm al-Qiyamah 700 camels, all of them bridled. And this hadith agrees with the ayat of Surah Al-Baqarah, مَثَلُ الَّذِينَ يُنْفِقُونَ أَمْوَالَهُمْ فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ كَمَثَلِ حَبَّةٍ أَنْبَتَتْ 7 سَنَابِلَ فِي كُلِّ سُنْبُلَةٍ 100 حَبَّةٍ. The one who spends in the way of Allah is like a grain from which grow forth 7 corns, and each corn has 100 grains in it. So that means for one grain you have a total of 700 grains coming back. And so here the Prophet says that for one camel which he has given in the way of Allah Jalla wa Ala, so that the luggage and the equipment of the mujahideen can be carried on it, so this is a camel in the way of Allah, so he will have 700 camels on Yawm al-Qiyamah. So anytime you give anything in the way of Allah Jalla wa Ala, it will be multiplied for you 700 times, and it could be even more if Allah so wishes. The next chapter about helping a ghazi, that is a mujahid, with something to ride upon and looking after his family after him. From Abu Mas'ud al-Ansari, he says, a man came to the Prophet and he says, my riding animal has been killed, so give me an animal to ride on. The Prophet said, I have no animal with me. To this another man said, أَنَا أَدُلُّهُ عَلَى مَنْ يَحْمِلُهُ. I will show him or take him to another person who will be able to give him a riding animal. To which the Prophet said, مَنْ دَلَّ عَلَى خَيْرٍ فَلَهُ مِثْلُ أَجْرِ فَاعِلِهِ. The one who guides another to something good has a reward similar to that of its doer. This hadith is broad in meaning. It includes the example that you have just heard of in the hadith, but it includes many other examples. So for example, a khatib giving a khutbah, telling people to do that which is righteous. If anyone acts on his advice, then the khatib will have a reward similar to that of the doer. So in this hadith there is an encouragement to enjoin the good and forbid the evil. And do not say, oh, let the people be free to do whatever they want, and I will not interfere in their affairs. No, rather enjoin the good, forbid the evil. Because if they act on your advice, then you will have the reward similar to that of the doer. So if they do that which is good, which they were not previously doing, because of your advice, you will have a similar reward. If they leave off something haram which they were doing because of your advice, you would have a similar reward. So in this, there is an encouragement to enjoin the good and forbid the evil. If somebody asks you, where is the masjid I want to pray, and you show him or direct him towards the masjid, you will have a reward similar to that of his prayer. Any good which you do, and its goodness reaches other people, then even if you did not intend to seek the face of Allah Jalla wa Ala, you are rewarded by simple virtue of the fact that the goodness reached other people. But if you did this seeking the face of Allah Jalla wa Ala, then it is even more reward worthy. So note this difference. If you plant a tree just for your own self, and that is your intention, however, from this tree, birds, animals, and humans eat from it, then you have delivered goodness to them and you will be rewarded, even if you did not intend for them to eat from it. Also, in the chapter from Anas ibn Malik, that a man from the tribe of Aslam came and said, O Messenger of Allah, I wish to fight, but I do not have anything to equip myself with for fighting. And the Prophet said to him, Go to Fulan, such and such a person, for he equipped himself to fight, but he fell ill. So the young man went to the other person, and he said that the Messenger of Allah sends you greeting and says to you that you should give me the equipage that you have provided for yourself to fight with. Then the man said to a woman in the house, Give this man the equipage that I have collected for myself, and do not withhold anything from him. Do not withhold anything from him, so that you may be blessed therein. The hadith is straightforward enough about helping a fighter in the way of Allah Jalla wa Ala, about providing him with equipment. However, the interesting note here is the man says that the Prophet is sending you greeting, but we do not find in the narration that the Prophet said to the man, Give my greetings to that man and then tell him to give you the equipage. So how do we interpret this then? Could it be that the Prophet did tell him, Send him my salam, yet the narrator did not mention it just for the sake of cutting short the narration, because that part about the salam is not really the main issue of the narration? Or could it be that this man said that the Prophet is sending you salam, yet the Prophet did not explicitly send the salam, only this man thought that it is from good etiquettes to convey the salam from the Prophet to the person he is visiting? We find this narration in the Musnad of Imam Ahmad as well, with the addition that the Prophet explicitly says to this man to convey my salam to him. So this ought to be the interpretation we go with, because we have textual evidence, and hence this man in the narration is not saying about the Prophet what he did not say. Also in the chapter from Khalid al-Juhani radiallahu anhu, that the Prophet said, Man jahhaza ghaziyan faqad ghaza, wa man khalafa ghaziyan fi ahlihi faqad ghaza. Whoever equips a ghazi, then he himself has fought. And whoever looks after the family of the ghazi, then it is as if he has participated in the battle. We find from the hadith that not only physically participating in the battle is virtuous from the numerous hadith which we have come across, but also helping out a ghazi, even if you yourself do not fight, is virtuous enough. So the one who equips a ghazi is like the one who has fought, so he has that reward. And the one who looks after the family of the ghazi after him is like the one who has fought. Meaning in terms of the reward, not in terms of the actual act itself. What about the one who helps a student of knowledge? Again, seeking knowledge is also striving in the way of Allah. The answer is yes, he also receives the reward. Of course, that is not the same as actually gaining knowledge, because if you help somebody gain knowledge, you are not yourself gaining knowledge. So we find there's a clear difference. They're not the same thing. However, you do have a great reward as if you were studying knowledge. In the Sahih, the poor people of the Sahaba, they complain that the rich of the Sahaba, they do all the acts of worship that the poor people do, but they can also give sadaqah and free servants, and the poor people cannot do that through no fault of their own. So the Prophet told them something that would equal those actions in reward, to make tasbih and tahmid and takbir 33 times after the salah. But then the rich ones heard of this and they started doing the same thing. And the poor people complained that the rich ones amongst us are copying this action. And the Prophet said, ذَلِكَ فَضْلُ اللَّهِ يُؤْتِيهِ مَنْ يَشَاءُ. This is the grace of Allah, He gives to whomsoever He wills. But you'll notice that the Prophet did not tell the poor people that because you intend to give charity and free the servants and so on, you are equal to them. Having a good intention is not the same as physically doing that action. You have your reward for your intention, but you cannot have the full reward for actually doing the action physically. And so it is a similar case for helping the Ghazi and for looking after his family after him, or even helping a student of knowledge to seek knowledge. You are rewarded, but it is not the same as actually physically carrying out the action. Another narration in the chapter, Abu Sa'id al-Khudri says that the Prophet dispatched a force to Banu Lihyan. Out of every 2 men, he sent one and kept one back. And he said to the one who was kept back, those of you who will look after the wealth and family of those who have gone forth in the expedition will have half the reward of those who have gone out. So we find from this narration that the reward is not equal. Let's take a look at the next chapter about the sanctity of the wives of the Mujahideen and the one who betrays the family of the Mujahideen in his absence. From Sulaiman ibn Buraidah, reported from his father, that the Prophet said, حُرْمَةُ نِسَاءِ الْمُجَاهِدِينَ عَلَى الْقَائِدِينَ كَحُرْمَةِ أُمَّهَاتِهِمْ. The sanctity of the wives of the Mujahideen over those who have remained back is like the sanctity of their mothers. وَمَا مِنْ رَجُلٍ مِنَ الْقَائِدِينَ يَخْلُفُ رَجُلًا مِنَ الْمُجَاهِدِينَ فِي أَهْلِهِ فَيَخُونُهُ فِيهِمْ إِلَّا وُقِفَ لَهُ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ فَيَأْخُذُ مِنْ عَمَلِهِ مَا شَاءَ فَمَا ظَنُّكُمْ. There is no man who looks after the family of the Mujahideen and he betrays him in that, except that he will be made to stand before the Mujahid on Yawm al-Qiyamah, and the Mujahid will take from his good deeds whatever he wants. So what do you think? This hadith is related to the previous one, مَنْ جَحَّزَ غَازِيًا فَقَدْ غَزَى وَمَنْ خَلَفَ غَازِيًا فِي أَهْلِهِ فَقَدْ غَزَى. Except now in this hadith, this man betrays the Ghazi with regards to his family. So instead of looking after his family well, he mistreats them, or perhaps takes their wealth away, or perhaps does not give them their rights, or abuses them. So he has betrayed the Mujahid with regards to his family. And the Mujahid will be able to take whatever of the traitor's good deeds that he wants. The Prophet says, فَمَا ظَنُّكُمْ. What do you think? That is, do you think the Mujahid is going to leave any of his good deeds? Of course not, he will take all of his good deeds away. So we find that such an act of treachery is a major sin. In fact, any act of treachery is a major sin, but to betray a Mujahid in the way of Allah Jalla wa'ala is extra special treachery. We find from this hadith the sanctity of the wives of the Mujahideen, because they do not have a breadwinner anymore, because their husbands have gone out for a noble cause, and because of this it raises the wives of the Mujahideen in their sanctity. Their sanctity is like the sanctity of your mother. No decent man would dare take liberties with his own mother. The next chapter about jihad not being compulsory for those who have an excuse. From Abu Ishaq, he heard Al-Bara talking about the ayah in Surah An-Nisa, that those who sit at home are not equal to those who go out to fight. He says Ibn Maktoum came and complained about his blindness, to which Allah Jalla wa'ala revealed the ayah, not equal are those who sit at home other than the ones who have an injury. They are not equal to the ones who go out to fight. The narration tells us that the ayat of the Quran, some of them can come down in response to questions which people ask or incidents which take place. These types of ayat are in the minority, however they do exist. So these people who have an impediment like blindness and so on, are they rewarded for the jihad? Well, the answer is if they have the intention, then they are rewarded. However, it is not the same as actually physically fighting, like we discussed before. The Prophet ﷺ authentically said at the Battle of Tabuk to his people, إِنَّ بِالْمَدِينَةِ أَقْوَامًا مَا سِرْتُمْ مَسِيرًا وَلَا قَطَعْتُمْ وَادِيًا إِلَّا كَانُوا مَعَكُمْ حَبَسَهُمْ الْعُذْرِ. In Medina there are people, you did not travel any distance, nor did you cut through any valley, except that they were with you. What held them back from joining you physically was that they had an excuse. So as long as you are sincere with the correct intention that you would have fought in the way of Allah if you could, then you are rewarded. But like we say, it's not the same as actually physically fighting, but you are rewarded for your intention. However, if you have the means to fight and the intention, and yet some preventative factor prevents you from fighting, then you are rewarded as if you physically fought. But if you do not have the means, then you are rewarded only for the intention, not for the physical action. So the matter revolves around whether you have the means or not. A question we have here is, whilst we know that the souls of the shuhada are in green birds,
grazing in Jannah wherever they want to, as has preceded. What about the souls of the other believers? We say their souls are in the grave, and their place in Jannah is shown to them in the morning and evening, as has been mentioned in the authentic hadith. And it is said to them, هذا مقعدك حتى يبعثك الله إلى يوم القيامة. إليه يوم القيامة. This is your seat that is shown to you until Allah will resurrect you to it on Yawm al-Qiyamah. Now there is another authentic hadith which says, إنما نسمة المؤمن طائر تعلق في ثمر الجنة. The soul of the mu'min is flying, hanging on to the fruits of Jannah. We need to understand the word mu'min here as the shaheed, and not just any mu'min. Also, we have found that the sins of the shaheed are expiated. However, we also have evidence to suggest that the major sins are not expiated, because if we know that the salah cannot expiate your major sins, then how do we expect anything else to expiate your major sins as well? We also have the narration authentically in which a person died in a battle after having stolen from the war booty, ghulul. He stole a cloak, and the people were happy when he died, expecting him to be in Jannah, as a shaheed is, of course. Yet the Prophet said, وَالَّذِي نَفْسِي بِيَدِهِ إِنَّ شَمْلَةَ الَّتِي غَلَّهَا لَتَشْتَعِلُ عَلَيْهِ فِي قَبْرِهِ. By the one who has my soul in his hand, the cloak which he stole from the war booty is being lit on fire in his grave. Okay, we have another question about the man who gave the camel fi sabilillah in the hadith which has preceded, and the Prophet said that you will have 700 camels, all bridled, in Jannah. Can we take from this that there will be camels in Jannah? The answer is yes. We take the hadith on its apparent meaning. So we may say that this man will have 700 camels in Jannah, which he will use to roam around wherever he wishes. And the camels of Jannah will not resemble the camels of this world. The only thing which is the same is the name. And it's also interesting that Ibn Hibban, the famous muhaddith, uses the hadith about the one who shows to goodness will have the reward of the one who does it, to say that the mu'adhin has the reward of all those people who pray because of his adhan, because it is the mu'adhin who shows the people that it is the time for salah.
The next chapter about the shaheed attaining Jannah. Reported by Jabir that a man said to the Prophet, if I am killed, will I attain Jannah? The Prophet replied, yes. And the man was holding some dates, and he threw these dates away, and he fought until he was killed. And this was on the day of Uhud. Also by Al-Bara, a man from the Banu Nabit tribe came and testified to the Shahada, and he went forth and fought until he was killed. And the Prophet said, عَمِلَ هَذَا يَسِيرًا
وَأُجِرَ كَثِيرًا.
He worked little but was rewarded much. Also in the chapter, at the Battle of Badr, the Prophet told his companions, go forth and enter paradise whose width is the heavens and the earth. To that Umayr ibn al-Hammam al-Ansari said, O Messenger of Allah, Jannah's width is the width of the heavens and the earth? The Prophet said, yes. Umayr said, Bakh, Bakh, which means bravo. And the Prophet asked him, why did you say that? And he replied, I only want to be from its residents. And the Prophet said, you are from its inhabitants. Umayr had some dates which he was eating, and he said, if I live long enough to finish all of these dates which I have, that would indeed be a long life. So he threw these dates away, went forth and fought until he was killed. We can take from this narration that Umayr ibn al-Hammam al-Ansari is from the inhabitants of Jannah. Why? Because the Prophet has testified that he is. So we will do the same thing. Otherwise, just look at the fadila, the virtue of Umayr ibn al-Hammam and his unwavering iman. We did not even detect an ounce of hesitancy in his iman. Also in the chapter, from Anas ibn Malik, some people came to the Prophet and asked him to send some men who will teach them the Quran. And the Prophet sent 70 men from the Ansar. They were reciters. Anas said, my maternal uncle, called Haram, was one of them. These people used to recite the Quran by night time, discuss and ponder its meaning, and by daytime they brought water and poured it in the pitchers in the masajid. They collected wood and sold it, and with the money they bought food for the poor people and the Ahlus Suffah, those people who would be residing in the masjid. So these people were sent. However, their hosts proved treacherous and killed them. While dying, they said, O Allah, convey from us to the Prophet that we have met you and are pleased with you and you are pleased with us. Anas says that a man stabbed Haram in the back, and Haram, as he was dying, he said, I have attained success by the Rabb of the Kaaba. And this message was conveyed to the Prophet, and he told the companions that your brothers have been killed, and they have said, O Allah, convey from us to the Prophet that we have met you whilst we are pleased with you and you are pleased with us. The details of this episode can be found in the books of Seerah, but we know that the Prophet for 1 month made dua against these treacherous people. You could argue that this narration does not belong in this set of hadith because there was no jihad which actually took place. The Muslims were not fighting these other people, rather it was just a matter of betrayal, which is different to an actual jihad. Nonetheless, these righteous people met a goodly end. Also in the chapter, Anas ibn Malik says that his uncle was not present in the Battle of Badr, and he felt distressed about this. He said, if Allah gives me an opportunity to fight with the Prophet, then Allah will see what I do. Meaning to say, Allah will see how bravely I fight. And he did not say any more than that. So on the day of Uhud, he came across Sa'ad ibn Mu'adh, who was retreating, and Anas said to him, O Abu Amr, where are you going? I find the smell of Jannah coming from Mount Uhud. And he went forth, fought the enemy, until he was killed. He had more than 80 wounds inflicted on him, with swords, spears and arrows on his body. Al-Rubai' bint an-Nadhr, the aunt of Anas ibn Malik, says, I could only recognize my brother because of his fingertips. And on this occasion, Allah sent down the ayah in Surah Al-Ahzab, among the mu'mineen, there are men who have been true to their covenant with Allah. Of them, some have completed their vow, but from them are those who are still waiting, but they have not changed their determination in the least. And in this, we find a virtue of Anas ibn Nadhr, the uncle of Anas ibn Malik, because the companions would think that this ayah came down for him and people of his like, those who fell at Uhud. Let's take a look at the next chapter about the one who fights to make the word of Allah the highest. He is fighting in the way of Allah. From Abu Musa al-Ash'ari, that a Bedouin asked the Prophet, الرجل يقاتل للمغنم والرجل يقاتل ليذكر والرجل يقاتل ليرى مكانه فمن في سبيل الله. A man fights just for the ghanima, another man fights that he may be remembered, and another man fights so that the people can see how courageous he is and what a fighter he is. So which of these is fighting in the way of Allah? The Prophet replied, من قاتل لتكون كلمة الله أعلى فهو في سبيل الله. Whoever fights so that the word of Allah can be the uppermost, then he is fighting in the way of Allah. So you find in the hadith the Prophet is given a choice of 3. He just moves away from all 3 of these choices and gives a general rule. The one who fights so that the word of Allah becomes the highest, his intention is the authentic intention. And it is similar if the enemy invades your land and you fight against the enemy so that the deen of Islam can prevail, as opposed to the ahkam of kufr, because if the kuffar occupy your land, then they will impose their laws and their language and customs, all of which are from kufr. So defending your land because it is an Islamic land and you want to maintain Islam as the uppermost word, that is also in the way of Allah, because you're doing it so that the word of Allah becomes the highest. In another narration in the chapter, the Prophet is given another 3 choices. He was asked that a man fights because he is brave, that is, he is brave and he loves to fight. Another man fights because of hamiyya, that is his nationalistic pride, or his tribal pride. And another man fights because of riya, showing off, because he just wants people to see how brave he is and what a fighter he is, and people can become his fans and want his autograph and so on. Who is fighting in the way of Allah? And the Prophet gave a similar reply. The next chapter, the theme is similar. Whoever fights to show off, then he is worthy of Jahannam. From Sulaiman ibn Yasar. The people gathered around Abu Hurairah and they asked him, O Shaykh, narrate to us a hadith which you heard from the Prophet. And so Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu narrated this following hadith. He said that the Prophet said, the first of men who will be judged on Yawm al-Qiyamah will be a man who died as a shaheed. He will be brought before the judgment. Allah will make him recount his blessings. Then Allah will ask him, what did you do with these blessings that I gave you? He said, I fought for you until I died as a shaheed. Allah will say, you have lied. You fought so that you might be called, oh, what a brave man he is. And so it was said. Then Allah will order him to be dragged and thrown in the fire, with his face downwards. Then will come a man who acquired knowledge and imparted it to others, and recited the Quran. Allah will make him recount his deeds and ask him, what did you do? He will say, I acquired knowledge and taught it, and recited the Quran seeking your pleasure. And Allah will say, you have lied. Rather, you acquired knowledge so that people may say, oh, what a scholar he is. And you recited the Quran so that people may say, what a qari, what a reciter he is. And so it was said. Then he will be ordered to be dragged to Jahannam face downwards. Then thirdly, a man will come whom Allah made rich and granted every type of wealth. Allah will make him recount his blessings and ask him, what did you do? And the man will say, I spent my wealth in every cause which you wished it to be spent. Then Allah will say, you have lied. Rather, you only spent this wealth so that it may be said about you, what a generous man he is. And so it was said, and he will be ordered, dragged face down to Jahannam. This is one of the main hadith to prove the importance of ikhlas, which is when you do your action solely seeking to see the face of Allah Jalla wa Ala in Jannah. When you do something which is righteous, such as reciting the Quran, or being knowledgeable and disseminating knowledge, or being highly charitable, it will get noticed, or at least it's very likely to, and the people may start to speak about you and perhaps praise you. That is not a problem in and of itself. In fact, the Prophet said about this, تِلْكَ عَاجِلُ بُشْرَ الْمُؤْمِنِ. This is the good news of the mu'min given to him in this life when people praise him for his righteous actions. There's nothing wrong with that in and of itself. What is wrong is that you should have your intention as such. That is, that you do your righteous actions so that people may praise you. And they may say, oh, what an alim he is, or perhaps, what a ghazi, a warrior he is, what a qari, a reciter he is, or what a jawad, what a generous man he is. If you have this as your intention, then you're doing your action for the people, not for Allah Jalla wa Ala. And hence this becomes a type of shirk. And riya is shirk. Only a little bit of riya is minor shirk. If all your actions are out of riya, showing off, then it does become major shirk. Because you're doing everything not for Allah. Because all your acts of ibadah are for other than Allah. But there's no difference between that and the conventional shirk that we know of. Be careful of the tricks of shaitan in this regard. If you're doing a righteous action, the shaitan might cast into your mind that you are showing off and doing it for other people, because maybe there are other people around you. And so do not let this type of waswasa make you stop doing the action, because you might think, oh, I am showing off, so therefore that is haram, it is a shirk, and therefore why don't I simply stop doing the action, and hence I will stop showing off. You must not fall for a thought like this. It is from shaitan. Rather, continue your righteous actions and seek refuge in the shaitan. Just like when you're in your salah and the shaitan comes and whispers into your mind to think of other things apart from the salah, do you stop performing the salah? The answer is no. You spit to your left 3 times, dry spits, and seek refuge from the shaitan. In fact, the Prophet said that this shaitan, his name is Khinzab. So he even has a name. And so this is what you have to do for every action in which you feel that you are showing off. You seek refuge from shaitan. Shaitan only wants to disrupt your righteous actions. So in all your actions, especially in seeking knowledge, because knowledge can lead you to become arrogant, you have to maintain tawadu, or humility. That is the case except for fighting in the way of Allah Jalla wa Ala, in which case you have to have a superiority complex. You have to feel that you are superior to the enemy and that you're able to beat them. Not complacent, but certainly confident that you are better than them. But that's not the same as underestimating your opponent and treating him like a little kid. And likewise, if you have to argue against the people of batil, you have to have a superiority complex, that you are better than them and that you can refute their batil arguments and establish your arguments over theirs. The next chapter about the one who fights and gains booty and the one who does not gain any booty. From Abdullah ibn Amr, that the Prophet said, ما من غازية تغزو في سبيل الله فيصيبون الغنيمة إلا تعجلوا ثلثي أجرهم من الآخرة ويبقى لهم الثلث وإن لم يصيبوا غنيمة تم لهم أجرهم. There are no troops of soldiers who fight in the way of Allah and then they receive the ghanima, except that they have taken in this life 2/3 of their total reward and 1/3 awaits them in the Akhirah. If they did not attain any ghanima, then they will have in the Akhirah the full reward. Okay, Know that this hadith is a subject of much controversy, because there are scholars who say that the meaning of this hadith is not sound. How is it that just because you attain ghanima from the war, that your reward for fighting is reduced in the hereafter? And so they would interpret the hadith on other than its apparent wording. And from these ta'wilat interpretations, one might say, well, if they attain ghanima, then their hearts may incline to the materialistic wealth, and that will be their reward, so they will have less reward in the hereafter. But as for if their hearts do not incline, then they will have the full reward. So that is to say that some of their ikhlas may be reduced to an extent, and hence their reward in the akhirah is reduced. But what is apparent from the narration is that this is the case in the absolute sense. If you receive ghanima, then this is 2/3 of your reward for fighting in this world given, 1/3 of the reward given to you in the hereafter. And if you do not attain ghanima, then the full reward is given to you in the hereafter, and that would be in lieu of your not attaining any ghanima. So it would be similar to something like a poor Muslim being rewarded more for keeping patient over his poverty. So this would be like a recompense for his patience. This is what is apparent from the hadith, and this is the opinion which An-Nawawi argues vehemently in his commentary of Sahih Muslim. In fact, he says that it is not permissible to adopt any opinion other than the one which is apparent from this hadith. The next chapter about actions of being by intention, from Umar ibn al-Khattab, that the Prophet said, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّةِ وَإِنَّمَا لِامْرِئٍ مَّا نَوَى فمن كانت هجرته إلى الله ورسوله فهجرته إلى الله ورسوله ومن كانت هجرته لدنيا يصيبها أو امرأة يتزوجها فهجرته إلى ما هاجر إليه. Actions are done only because you have an intention before, and every person will have what he intends. So whoever makes hijrah to Allah and the Messenger, then his hijrah is for Allah and the Messenger. And whoever makes hijrah for economic reasons, to attain some materialistic part of this world, or to marry a woman, then his hijrah is for whatever he makes hijrah for. The ulama say that if you link this hadith with the hadith of Aisha, مَنْ عَمِلَ عَمَلًا لَيْسَ عَلَيْهِ أَمْرُنَا فَهُوَ رَدٌّ, whoever does an action not in accordance with the master of ours, then it is rejected, then it completes the whole of the sharia, because the hadith of Umar speaks about your intention, and the hadith of Aisha speaks about your physical actions. And intention combined with physical actions make up the whole of the sharia, because what's left after intention and physical action? Well, nothing. One is inward, the other is outward. And with this hadith, you can turn even normal actions into ibadah. When you eat and drink, you just have to have the right intention, that you intend that you're eating and drinking to give you strength so that you can carry on worshipping Allah or worship Him even more effectively. This eating and drinking becomes reward worthy now. The kafir also eats and drinks, but he does not have this intention, so he's not reward worthy. What about for marriage? Kuffar also get married. They do not have reward-worthy intention. If you have reward-worthy intention of keeping chaste, of increasing the ummah and pleasing the Prophet, of treating your spouse right and giving her the right that she deserves and bringing happiness into her life, and also to follow the sunnah of all the messengers, these are praiseworthy intentions for which you are rewarded for your marriage. Otherwise, the kuffar are also getting married. Same thing when you're sleeping. So your intention is you want to gain rest and regain strength so that you can continue on worshipping Allah Jalla wa'ala. Otherwise the kuffar also sleep. As for the wording of the hadith, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّةِ, this means that actions are only done because you first have an intention. Only an insane person performs an action without an intention. وَإِنَّمَا لِامْرِئٍ مَّا نَوَى, and for a person is what he intends. This is the reward of his intention, or punishment as the case may be. So two actions which look the same may differ immensely just because of the intention. One person makes hijrah from one country to another country for the sake of Allah Jalla wa'ala, to leave off the land of kufr and to be in a land in which he can openly practice his deen. Another person makes hijrah, let's say to the same country, but just as an economic migrant. Just because there are better economic opportunities in that country, he's not doing it to leave off the land of kufr and to be in a land of Islam, where he can openly practice his deen. Neither of them are sinful in this case, but one is reward worthy, the other one is not. The kuffar can make hijrah from one place to another for economic reasons. Note on a linguistic level, he says whoever makes hijrah for the dunya or for a woman he wants to marry, then his hijrah is for that which he makes hijrah for. The Prophet did not say his hijrah is for the world or for the woman. And the reason why he does not say that, whereas he does say it with regards to Allah and the Messenger, is to belittle the intention of the second person, make hijrah for economic reasons or for a woman he wants to marry. An interesting point about this hadith, know that this hadith is narrated by Umar only from the Sahaba, and from Umar only Alqamah reported, and from Alqamah only Muhammad ibn Ibrahim reported it. So in the first 3 steps or stages, it is gharib, only one person reports it. Then after Muhammad ibn Ibrahim, many people have reported this hadith. And notice how strange it is that Umar ibn al-Khattab is narrating this hadith from the minbar, in which a gathering of people is listening to him, yet only Alqamah reported it from him. How is it that all of these other people who would have been listening to him did not report it? This is strange. So it appears all of these people hearing him did not themselves narrate it on except Alqamah. The next chapter about seeking to be a shaheed. From Sahal ibn Hunayf, from his father, that the Prophet said, Man sa'ala Allah ash-shahadata bisidqin ballaghahu Allahu manazil ash-shuhada'i wa in mata ala firashih. Whoever asks Allah for shahada with truth, that is with sincerity, then Allah will make him reach the ranks of the shuhada, even if he dies on his bed. So we take from the narration that it is permissible to ask Allah Jalla wa Ala to make you die as a shaheed. Remember, when you fight, you do not fight for the sake of shahada, rather you fight for the word of Allah to be the highest. Then if you happen to be killed in the way of Allah by the enemy, then that is good enough. Note that there is no wishful thinking in the Sharia. If you are able to fight and you do not go out to fight, yet you ask Allah Jalla wa Ala for shahada, then you have not asked Allah for shahada bisidq,
with truth, which is one of the conditions laid down in the hadith. Also, it's worth pointing out from the narration of Anas ibn Nadr, who fought in the Battle of Uhud and was killed, he went into the midst of the enemies and was found with more than 80 stab wounds, and his sister could only recognize him from his fingertips. From this, Al-Qurtubi rahimahullah says that it is permissible for a Muslim to charge in the enemy ranks to fight courageously even if he knows or is pretty much sure that he's going to be killed. Okay, then what about suicide missions where you know you're going to die? This is subject to ijtihad. If the benefits are greater than the harms, then the Imam may permit this, but it has to be from the permission of the Imam. Another question that could crop up is that if a mujahid is captured by the enemies and he's being tortured for information, is he allowed to kill himself? Because he fears that if he is tortured, he may spill out this information, which could cause the downfall of the Muslims. Here we say that if the secrets are such that if in spilling them to the kuffar, it will lead to a great downfall of the state, and the harms will be indeed great, then in order to avoid a greater corruption, he may kill himself. Otherwise, the asl is you're not allowed to kill yourself even if you are suffering, due to the generality of the evidence. But even if we give the permission to kill himself, it needs to be over a secret which is in fact a massive secret, a game-changing secret, not just a little secret, which even if the kuffar got to know about, it would not really rock the boat that much. So here, judgment must be exercised. Also, in the hadith of Abu Musa about the man who asked about the intention of the mujahid, who is really in the way of Allah, in a narration it says the Prophet raised his head up to answer. And the reason for that, the narration says, is because the Prophet was sitting down and the questioner was standing up. And we say this is permissible if there is a need for it. However, what is better is for the questioner to sit down if the teacher is also sitting down. And we take this from the hadith of Jibreel alayhi salam, when he put his knees next to the knees of the Prophet. Okay, let's take some review questions at this stage. So question number 1. Generally, the sins of the shaheed are forgiven, but are there any exceptions? Question number 2. Is it okay to desire martyrdom? And if it's okay, would it be okay to fight in order to become a shaheed? Explain your answer and any differences. Question number 3. In the context of fighting in the way of Allah in a military expedition, are suicide operations permissible? Explain your answer.